My brother extended an invitation to us, prompting our arrival. Consequently, we won't be responsible for rent or utility expenses, placing our reliance on you, Ashley. I work in the finance sector, and my husband, whom I'll refer to as Bob, is a car mechanic. We currently reside in my childhood home. By childhood home, I don't mean that my parents are still living there. In reality, my family home has a long-standing history as a family business, where my father once held the position of CEO. I have a brother who was initially groomed to take over my father's company. He pursued a degree in economics during college and studied business management abroad at Oxford University. Upon his return to the United States, he worked alongside my father for several years. Eventually, my parents sought to embrace their retirement years and relocated to a place like Aspen, Colorado, seemingly enjoying their leisurely life surrounded by nature. With my brother taking over the family business, my parents passed down the family home to me, their daughter. My husband and I made the decision to reside there. The house's location is quite convenient, with excellent access to public transportation, situated just a 5-minute walk from the train station. Furthermore, commercial facilities, hospitals, and schools are all within walking distance. Thinking ahead to when our children would leave the nest, we envisioned a comfortable life. In this regard, I am grateful that my parents entrusted me with this house as we were planning to expand our family and live contentedly. However, we never anticipated that our lives would take such an unexpected turn due to a particular incident. After moving into this house, my mother-in-law began visiting frequently. Knowing that my parents had run a business, she often inquired about their financial situation. She would ask questions like, "Hey Ashley, how much in assets do your parents have?" Or, "When your parents pass away, how much will you inherit?" Her persistent interest in these matters left me with a sense of distaste. I didn't want to be too direct in my response, so I replied, "I wonder. I've never really thought about it, so I don't know. I've already received the house, so I might not receive any money." Even though I attempted to brush it off with a light-hearted response, she insisted, "That can't be true, can it? Your parents are over 60, and you never know what might happen. They must have discussed their assets with you." At that moment, I became convinced that she was banking on my parents' wealth. Despite knowing the actual amount I would inherit, I chose to remain silent, believing it best not to share this information with my mother-in-law or my husband, who was close to her. However, an unimaginable incident transpired after this. Suddenly, without any prior notice, my mother-in-law and my brother-in-law's family moved into our house around 8 a.m. on a holiday. The doorbell rang unexpectedly. When I opened the door, I was met with movers. Perplexed and confused, I asked, "Why are the movers here?" To my astonishment, my mother-in-law and my brother-in-law's family stood before me, grinning. They casually declared, "We're going to be living here from today, so please take care of us." I felt a chill run down my spine at their audacity. Just then, my husband woke up, and when I asked him to explain the situation, he responded, "What's the problem if Mom and the others move into this house? It's so spacious that you should be able to spare some room." I was already taken aback by the fact that we were now sharing our home, but my sister-in-law added another shocking statement, "We were invited by your brother, Ashley, since he called us. As a result, we won't be paying rent or utilities, so we're counting on you, Ashley." As if that weren't enough, my brother-in-law took the liberty to intrude into various rooms without permission, declaring, "This room has good sunlight, so give it to us, Bob, please move all of the stuff out to the hallway." I was left feeling dizzy after this exchange. This is my house, yet they're casually opening rooms and trying to claim them as their own. My mother-in-law and sister-in-law's family have been displaying a lack of common sense for some time now, especially my sister-in-law, who had previously rummaged through my bag without permission. If things continue like this, they'll take over my room. Enough is enough, this is my house. Why are you behaving as though you own this place? I'd reached my breaking point. I wanted everyone to leave. I'm not one to lose my composure or raise my voice in anger, but having these individuals move into the house my parents gave me without permission and treating it as if it were theirs was something I couldn't tolerate. That's why I lost control of my emotions and shouted at all three of them. However, what happened next was entirely unexpected. How dare you talk to us like that? You're the one who should get out. The moment those words were spoken, I felt a sharp pain in my cheek. Wait, had I been slapped? It took a few seconds for the reality of the situation to sink in. I was left stunned, unable to believe what had just happened, with nothing but a throbbing pain in my cheek. In that moment, something inside me snapped. It goes without saying that I couldn't live with people who would resort to such actions. But this house was mine, and I had no intention of allowing them to live here like parasites. I began packing my things with the intention of leaving the house, fully intending to inform my family about this situation. I had to find a place far away from home, so I decided to rent a monthly apartment for the time being. From there, I would have to commute to work. The moment I broke the news to my parents over the phone, I could sense their fury, even through the receiver, especially my dad. He had always been very fond of me and my brother. Despite being a strict CEO as a father, he was always kind and quick to help when we were in trouble. I didn't want to involve my parents, who were on the brink of retirement, in something like this. However, I felt forced to because my inherited house was being taken away from me. While I was residing in the monthly apartment, I was sure that my husband and his family were freely using my house. So I decided to follow the advice of my brother and father. A few days later, I checked my phone during a break and found dozens of missed calls and messages from my husband. I knew exactly why he was calling. I had contacted the water and electric companies to disconnect the utilities. Our house relied entirely on electricity, and we hadn't installed solar panels, so there was no way to supply electricity. Given the current hot weather, it must have been quite tough without electricity and water. My husband's messages and calls were probably an urgent plea for me to do something about it. Just as I was about to ignore it, my husband called again, timing it perfectly with my break. Hey, what's going on? There's no electricity, and the water isn't working. You stopped the electricity and water, didn't you? I could clearly hear the panic in his voice over the phone. The house is mine, and now that I'm gone, there's no way I can leave the electricity and water on, right? That's why I had them disconnected. If I left the utilities on, I would have to foot the bills, even though I wasn't living there. I couldn't accept that, so naturally, I had them disconnected. Upon hearing this, my husband was furious and demanded that I renew the utility contracts immediately. Just because you said to renew them, didn't mean I would simply agree. If they wanted to renew them, they should do it with their own money. Whenever these situations arose, they would always say things like, "It's your house, so you should pay." Their words and actions didn't align. In any case, I had no intention of renewing the contracts or paying for them. "If you don't like it, then get out of the house right away," I asserted before abruptly ending the call, as my break was coming to an end. Subsequently, my mother-in-law, sister-in-law, and brother-in-law all called me. They all echoed the same request. They wanted me to restore the electricity and water. They complained about their uncomfortably hot rooms and the inconvenience of living without water. But all of this was their problem, not mine. After listening to their pleas, I firmly told them to handle it themselves and hung up the phone. I assumed their motivation was simply greed for money, and I thought they would give up and leave soon. However, even after a week had passed, there was no sign of them leaving. So I decided to take further action. I consulted with my father's company lawyer about the situation and asked him to send a notice to my husband regarding the issue of trespassing. They had entered the house I owned without any consultation, forced me out, and were using it as their own. I explained to the four of them who had employed this malicious tactic that I was considering taking legal action. But then came their response, "Hey, what's going on? Why did I receive a legal notice from a lawyer? Was it necessary to escalate it to this level?" My husband, appearing panicked and not anticipating me taking such drastic measures, approached me with the intention of reaching a settlement. Given their concern for their public image, the thought of being sued would be mentally damaging to them. Clearly, they wanted to avoid involving lawyers at all costs. However, they didn't want to relinquish their current lifestyle, so they were likely scheming to persuade me to let them continue living in my house. I could see through my husband's intentions as if they were in the palm of my hand. Nevertheless, I had no intention of yielding to their demands. In response to my firm stance, my husband finally exploded in anger, forgetting that he was at work. He yelled loudly, "Cut it out. Are you getting carried away just because we're a little underhanded? You can't act so high and mighty. Go back to how things were right now and drop the lawyer." Despite his furious outburst, it had no effect on me. On the contrary, I found myself annoyed by his phone call, thinking, "Who do you think you are, taking over someone else's house?" Regardless of what he said or how loud he shouted, my determination remained unwavering. If they continued to squat there, I would indeed take legal action. I made this clear over the phone. My husband continued to raise his voice, but I chose to ignore him and hung up. I deemed it a waste of time, and furthermore, I had already discussed divorce with my lawyer. When I arrived home, I noticed missed calls from my mother-in-law and sister-in-law. However, I knew their intentions were solely to discuss a settlement. Wishing to avoid any further waste of my time, I decided to block their numbers to prevent additional calls. After that, my husband's family, driven by their pride and the fear of being sued, packed their bags and vacated the house. Subsequently, the lawyer intervened, and the divorce negotiations proceeded smoothly. I'd also arranged for a house cleaning service to restore my home to its pristine condition. Finally, I was able to return to my sparkling clean house. Living separately from my husband's family and residing in a monthly rental was comfortable. But living in my own house was undoubtedly the best. Although the house showed signs of wear and tear in some places, I knew I needed to consider renovations in the near future. I consulted with my father, who introduced me to a reliable contractor. Thus, I began exploring options for renovation. Living alone was undeniably comfortable. I was free from anyone's constraints. I could lounge on the sofa without being scolded and eat whatever I pleased without anyone's judgment. While I relished my current life, I received a call from my ex-husband for the first time in 3 months. Initially, I hesitated to answer the phone because I didn't recognize the number. However, as the calls persisted, I reluctantly picked up, thinking it might be related to a contractor. But as soon as I recognized the voice, my mood plummeted. It was my ex-husband, from whom I had divorced 3 months ago. We had even made a commitment through our lawyers never to contact each other again. So what on earth did he want now? Furthermore, he had changed his phone number solely to call me, which struck me as odd. Regardless of how I looked at it, we had legally agreed not to see or communicate with each other ever again. There was nothing left for us to discuss. So I sternly stated, "Please don't contact me anymore." Just as I was about to hang up the phone, however, he implored, "Hold on a minute, please. I just need you to listen, just for a little while. I'm begging you." With that, he began speaking without my consent. Apparently, my ex-husband's company was grappling with a severe financial crisis, and it had been decided that his salary would be reduced. His mother-in-law's health was deteriorating, rendering her unable to work, and his sister-in-law and her husband couldn't contribute to the living expenses because he lacked stable employment. His sister-in-law was juggling multiple part-time jobs, but most of her earnings were used to repay her brother-in-law's debts. Their situation was dire. As I listened to his plea, I couldn't help but think, okay, is that so? Given that they had invaded my house without my consent, done as they pleased, and even attempted to evict me, I found it difficult to muster any sympathy for the people who had perpetrated these actions. Even with all this information, it didn't change my perspective. I replied, "It's your family, and you should deal with it yourselves. There's nothing I can do about it." My words prompted my ex-husband to panic even more. "Don't say things like that. We're in serious trouble. We won't even be able to pay the rent for the apartment and will struggle for food tomorrow. We used to be a family, right? Please help us," he pleaded, his voice nearly on the brink of tears. However, I remained unconvinced. During my times of trouble, he showed no willingness to assist, and he, along with my mother-in-law, looked down on me. Similar sentiments were echoed by my sister-in-law and brother-in-law, who consistently belittled me. They mocked my simple appearance and my traditional way of thinking. Their insults cut deep, and they openly expressed their desire for me to stay away, claiming that my old-fashioned demeanor was rubbing off on them. Their disregard for my feelings was evident. As for my mother-in-law, she not only exacerbated the situation but also pressured me to conceive a child as soon as possible. She subjected me to strange herbal remedies, unnecessary doctor's appointments, and even spread rumors among our neighbors, falsely labeling me as a barren wife. Looking back, there wasn't a single positive aspect of my marriage. My ex-husband, who had been kind before our marriage, transformed into his mother's puppet after our wedding. On the first day, my mother-in-law intruded into her house while I was out for an appointment. She expressed her disappointment to my husband and tearfully declared her desire to befriend me. Upon hearing his mother's complaints, my ex-husband scolded me without bothering to hear my side of the story. She claims she wants to get along, but all she ever does is badmouth me. Our son seems to have lost weight recently. Is it because your cooking is so bad that he can't eat properly? These were the types of hurtful comments she made loudly, both at home and in public, leaving no room for us to establish any kind of rapport. My sister-in-law and brother-in-law joined in, openly ridiculing me. Faced with such behavior, I realized that I could no longer attempt to connect with people who treated me this way. Regardless of what they said or did, my feelings would not change. I conveyed this to them, stating firmly that I couldn't help them, and I hung up the phone, instructing them not to contact me again. However, I was well aware of my ex-husband's persistence, and I anticipated that he might change his number and attempt to contact me once more. Therefore, I decided to change my phone number and restore over the weekend. But before I could make that change, the four of them took drastic action. They violated the lawyer's promise and suddenly appeared at my house at 11 p.m., demanding to be let in, insisting that I should accommodate them because we were family. They pounded on the door and raised their voices, without any regard for the late hour. I couldn't believe I was dealing with individuals so out of control. I found myself at a loss and considered calling the police. Just as I contemplated this, I heard sirens approaching from outside. It seemed a concerned neighbor had taken the initiative. As soon as the group heard the police sirens, they assumed I had called the authorities and attempted to flee. However, by that time, a crowd had gathered, leaving them with no escape. Consequently, the responding officers escorted the four of them to the police station. I was questioned about the incident and provided a detailed account of everything that had transpired. News of the incident quickly spread throughout the neighborhood. To my surprise, among the onlookers was one of my ex-husband's co-workers. By the next day, the entire office was aware of what had occurred. Given that my ex-husband was already struggling due to a salary cut, his involvement with the police prompted the company to take further action. He was ultimately terminated from his job and found himself unable to afford his apartment rent. Financial trouble strained his relationship with his sister's family, resulting in the dissolution of their shared living arrangement. Currently, Bob resides in public housing with his mother, working multiple part-time jobs to make ends meet. Even his mother has joined the workforce, taking on part-time roles a few days a week in a desperate effort to earn money.